She welcomed a homeless man into her home. Unaware he was a mafia boss obsessed with her, the rain in the city did not wash things clean. It only seemed to make the grime slicker, turning the potholes into black mirrors that reflected the neon vacancy signs flickering above. Alina tightened her scarf around her neck, ducking her head against the biting wind. It was 2 a.m, and her shift at the coffee shop had ended an hour later than scheduled because the evening closer had called in sick again. She could feel the ache in the arches of her feet. Every step toward her apartment building was a negotiation with gravity. She shifted the paper bag of day-old pastries she had salvaged from the dumpster bin pile, perfectly good croissants that the manager made them throw out, to her other arm. This was breakfast for Josh. It was lunch for Josh. It was the only way they were going to make rent this month without dipping into the emergency fund she kept hidden in a hollowed-out book on her nightstand. Alina was 24 years old, but tonight she felt ancient. Since her parents had died in that highway collision 3 years ago, she had become mother, father, and provider to a teenage boy who was growing too fast and eating everything in sight. She turned the corner onto her street, her eyes scanning the shadows out of habit. A single woman walking alone at this hour had to be vigilant. The streetlights here were sporadic, buzzing with dying electricity. That was when she saw him. He was a heap of dark clothing collapsed against the brick wall near the entrance to her building. At first, Alina thought it was just trash bags left out for collection, but then the pile moved. A low, pained sound barely audible over the drumming rain reached her ears. Her instinct was to keep walking. Keep her head down, get inside, lock the deadbolt. That was the rule of the city. You survive by minding your own business. She took 2 steps toward the heavy iron door of her complex, her hand gripping her keys so hard her knuckles turned white. But then she heard it again, a sharp intake of breath, followed by a groan that sounded like something tearing. Alina stopped. She looked at the heavy door, then back at the figure. Damn it, she thought. She walked over to him, keeping a safe distance. The man was large, even curled up in a fetal position. His clothes were soaked through. A heavy wool coat that might have once been expensive now coated in mud and oil. His dark hair was plastered to his skull. "Hey," she called out, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You can't sleep here. The super will call the cops." The man did not answer. He shivered, a violent tremor that racked his entire frame. Alina took a step closer. "Sir?" He lifted his head. The movement was sluggish, like he was fighting the weight of the atmosphere itself. When the streetlight caught his face, Alina felt the breath catch in her throat. He was battered. One eye was swollen shut, a vivid purple bruise blooming across his cheekbone. There was dried blood matting his beard and a nasty gash above his eyebrow that had reopened in the rain, sending a fresh rivet of crimson down his jaw. But it was his good eye that froze her. It was dark, almost black, and despite his injuries, it held a terrifying intensity. There was no plea for help in that gaze. There was only a cold, hard assessment. He looked like a wolf caught in a trap, wounded, but ready to bite the hand that reached for it. "Leave me," he rasped. His voice was like gravel grinding together. "You're hurt," Alina said, the observation stupidly obvious. She saw him clutch his side, his large hand pressing against the wet fabric of his shirt. The rain was washing away blood there, too. "Go away," he managed, trying to shift his weight, but his arm gave out and he slumped back against the wet bricks, his head lolling forward. Alina looked up at her apartment window on the 3rd floor. Josh was asleep. The apartment was small, barely enough for the 2 of them. This was dangerous. This was stupid. This was how horror movies started. But she looked at his hands. They were empty. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was shivering so hard his teeth were beginning to chatter. If she left him here, in this freezing rain, with those injuries, the coroner would be zipping him into a bag by sunrise. "I'm not leaving you here to die," Alina said, the resolve in her voice surprising even her. She stepped forward and crouched down. "Can you stand?" The man looked at her again. Confusion flickered through the pain in his dark eye. He seemed unable to comprehend why she was still there. "I live upstairs," she said. her tone leaving no room for argument. "I have a first aid kit and a couch. If you try anything, I have a taser and I know how to use it. Do you understand?" He stared at her for a long moment, then, slowly, he nodded. It took nearly 10 minutes to get him up the 3 flights of stairs. He was heavy, a wall of solid muscle beneath the soaked coat, but he leaned as little of his weight on her as possible, gritting his teeth against the agony in his side. He smelled of rain, metallic blood, and something faintly expensive like cedar and tobacco buried under the grime. When they finally stumbled into her apartment, the warmth of the radiator hit them like a physical wall. Alina locked the door behind them, throwing the deadbolt, the chain, and the bottom lock. "Couch," she whispered. Pointing to the worn beige sofa in the living room, the man didn't argue. He staggered toward it and collapsed, not even bothering to remove his coat. He hit the cushions and was out, his breathing ragged and shallow. Alina stood there for a moment, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stared at the stranger in her living room. Mud was dripping onto her rug. "What have I done?" she asked herself. She moved quietly to check on Josh. Her brother was sprawled out on his bed, headphones still over his ears, oblivious to the world. She closed his door gently. She returned to the living room with a basin of warm water, a towel, and the first aid box. She approached the man cautiously, up close. In the dim light of the hall lamp, he looked even more severe. His face was hard, defined by a strong jawline and a nose that looked like it had been broken once before. Years ago. She peeled the wet coat off him. He groaned but didn't wake. Underneath, he wore a dress shirt that was ruined, stained dark with blood on the left side. Alina hesitated, then unbuttoned the shirt to check the wound. It was a knife wound, or maybe a graze from a bullet. She couldn't tell, and she didn't have the medical knowledge to diagnose it properly, but it had stopped bleeding profusely. It looked angry and inflamed, but not arterial. She cleaned it as best she could, her hands gentle. He flinched in his sleep when the antiseptic touched his skin, his hand shooting out to grip her wrist. Alina gasped, freezing. His grip was iron, even unconscious. His reflexes were predatory, but a second later, his hand relaxed and fell away. She bandaged him, draped a heavy wool blanket over his shivering form, and then sat in the armchair across the room, watching him. She held her taser in her lap. She didn't sleep that night. She just watched the rise and fall of the stranger's chest, wondering who he was and why he looked like a fallen king rather than a beggar. The man woke up with the sunrise. Pain was the first thing he registered. It radiated from his ribs, a dull, throbbing fire that pulsed with every beat of his heart. The second thing he registered was the smell. Coffee. Real coffee. And the scent of vanilla and old books. He opened his eyes. He was not in a ditch. He was not in the back of the meatpacking truck where he had stowed away 2 nights ago. He was in a room that smelled of peace. Victor Morelli, the head of the Morelli crime family, the man the FBI had a file on as thick as a dictionary, lay still. His eyes darted around the room, assessing exits, weapons, threats. A small television sat on a crate, a bookshelf overflowed with paperbacks, a window with peeling paint let in the gray morning light, and in the kitchen, a few feet away, a woman was moving. Memory returned to him in jagged shards. The rain, the cold, the woman with the defiant eyes and the voice that trembled with bravery she shouldn't have had to possess. He tried to sit up, but a hiss of pain escaped his lips. The woman turned immediately. She was wearing a faded, oversized t-shirt and leggings, her hair pulled up in a messy knot. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes, likely because she hadn't slept while guarding him. "You're awake," she said. She didn't come closer. She stayed behind the kitchen island, a safe barrier. "I made coffee." Victor stared at her. He should leave. Every second he stayed here, he endangered her. The men who had come for him, his own men, led by his traitorous underboss, Sal, would scour the city until they found a corpse. If they found him here, they would burn this building to the ground with everyone inside. "Water," he croaked. His throat felt like he had swallowed glass. She poured a glass of water and brought it to him, setting it on the coffee table before retreating quickly. Victor sat up, ignoring the screaming protest of his oblique muscles. He drank the water in one long draught. "I need to go," he said, his voice gaining a fraction of its usual command. "You have a fever," Alina said. She crossed her arms over her chest. "You were burning up all night. If you go out there, you'll collapse again within a block. That is not your concern. It is my concern," she countered, her chin tilting up. "Because I'm the one who dragged you up 3 flights of stairs. I'm not letting that effort go to waste." Victor looked at her, really looked at her. In the daylight, she was stunning in a way that had nothing to do with glamour. She was raw and real. Her eyes were the color of amber, clear and honest. She had no idea who he was. To her, he was debris. And yet, she stood there arguing with him about his health. "Why did you help me?" he asked. Alina shrugged, looking uncomfortable. "You looked like you needed it, and you didn't look crazy. Just hurt. I could be dangerous." "Are you?" she asked, point blank. Victor paused. "Yes." Alina didn't flinch. "Well, don't be dangerous in my apartment. My brother lives here. If you so much as look at him wrong, I will scream so loud the entire neighborhood will come running." Victor felt the corner of his mouth twitch. A smile. He hadn't smiled in years. "Understood." "I'm Alina," she said. He hesitated. He couldn't give his real name. The name Victor Morelli was currently being broadcast on police scanners and whispered in fear across the 5 boroughs. "Vic," he said. It was close enough to the truth to feel natural. "Okay, Vic, the deal is this. You can stay until the fever breaks. 2 days, maybe 3. I have food, but not a lot, so you eat what we eat, and you stay away from the windows." He nodded slowly. Staying here was tactical suicide, yet his body refused to move. He was weaker than he thought, and there was something about this place, this tiny, cluttered sanctuary, that pulled at him. It felt safe. "Thank you," he said. 3 days turned into 5. Victor's strength returned rapidly, though he was careful to hide the full extent of his recovery. He spent the days on the couch while Alina worked her shifts. He listened to the sounds of the building, the footsteps in the hall, the arguments next door. He analyzed the security of the apartment. The lock was flimsy. The fire escape window was rusted shut. He made mental notes on how to fortify them without alerting her. He watched Alina. He watched her count out dollar bills on the kitchen table, her brow furrowed in worry. He watched her laugh with her brother, a lanky kid named Josh who stared at Victor with suspicion, before eventually warming up when Victor showed him how to fix the glitchy joystick on his game controller. Victor was fascinated by her. She was exhausted, constantly moving, carrying a burden too heavy for her narrow shoulders. Yet she never complained. She was soft with her brother and hard with the world. While she was at work, Victor's mind drifted back to the betrayal. Flashback. It had been a setup, a meeting in the warehouse district to discuss territory lines with the Russians. Sal had been driving. Sal, who Victor had trusted with his life since they were boys stealing hubcaps in Brooklyn. They had stopped at a red light. Victor had looked out the window, and he had seen the reflection in the side mirror, Sal exiting the car, leaving the engine running. Victor had moved a split second before the first bullet shattered the glass where his head had been. He had rolled, the car erupting into chaos as shooters emerged from the alley. He took 2 bullets, one in the shoulder, one grazing his ribs, before he managed to return fire and vanish into the labyrinth of the sewers. He had dragged himself through filth for miles, bleeding out, listening to the sirens and the shouting. He had emerged in Alina's neighborhood, a ghost in his own city. End flashback now, sitting in her living room. Victor felt a cold rage simmering in his gut. Sal thought he was dead. Good. Let him think about it. Let him get comfortable on the throne. A king was most vulnerable when he thought the war was over, but for now, Victor was just a homeless man on a beige couch. "You're staring," Alina said. Victor blinked. It was evening. Rain was lashing the windows again. Josh was at a friend's house for a study group. The apartment was quiet. Alina was standing near the couch, holding a fresh roll of gauze. "It's time to change that dressing." Victor sat up, wincing slightly for show. Though the pain had dulled to a manageable ache, He unbuttoned the flannel shirt she had found for him, an old one of her father's that was tight across Victor's broad shoulders. He shrugged it off, exposing his torso. Alina's breath hitched. Victor knew what she saw. It wasn't just the fresh wound on his side. His body was a map of violence. Old scars, knife marks, burn tissues. The history of his rise to power was written in white lines on his skin. She didn't look away. She sat on the edge of the coffee table, her eyes tracing the scars before meeting his gaze. "You've had a hard life, Vic," she said softly. "Life is hard for everyone," he replied. "Some just show it more than others." She reached out, her cool fingers peeling away the old tape. He watched her face. She was focused, her tongue poking slightly from the corner of her mouth. She smelled like vanilla and rain. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to touch her, to run his hand down the curve of her neck, to see if her skin was as soft as it looked. It was a dangerous thought. She was a civilian. She was innocent. He was a monster hiding in her living room. Alina finished cleaning the wound and applied a fresh pad. She began to wrap the gauze around his ribs. To do so, she had to lean in close. Her hair brushed against his shoulder. The heat of her body radiated toward him. "Lift your arm," she murmured. He obeyed. She reached around him to pass the roll of gauze to her other hand. For a moment, she was practically embracing him. Her cheek hovered inches from his bare chest. She froze. Victor stopped breathing. She could feel his heart beating, a slow, powerful thud against his ribs. He could feel the tremble in her hands. Alina pulled back slightly, her eyes lifting to meet him. They were wide, darkened by a sudden awareness. The air in the room seemed to vanish, replaced by a thick, electric tension that hummed between them. She looked at his lips. He saw it. A subconscious flicker. Victor's hand moved without his permission. He caught her wrist, his thumb brushing over her pulse point. Her heart was racing. "Alina," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a warning and a caress all at once. She didn't pull away. She stared at him, paralyzed by the sudden shift in dynamic. The injured stray dog was gone. The man sitting before her was intense, powerful, and looking at her with a hunger that should have terrified her. "I should finish," she whispered, her voice breathless. "Yes," Victor said, but he didn't let go of her wrist. "You should." They stayed like that for 5 heartbeats. The rain drummed against the glass. The city outside ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his hand on her skin and the question hanging in the silence between them. Finally, Victor slowly released her. Alina jerked back as if burned. She fumbled with the gauze, her movements frantic and clumsy now. She finished the wrapping without looking at him again. Her face flushed a deep pink. "There," she said, standing up quickly. "Good as new." She retreated to the kitchen, putting the width of the room between them. Victor watched her go. He leaned his head back against the couch cushions, closing his eyes. He was in trouble. Sal and the traders were a problem he could solve with bullets and strategy. But this woman with the amber eyes who had saved his life? He was beginning to realize that leaving this apartment was going to be the hardest thing he had ever done. And the longer he stayed, the more he wanted to keep her. Not just safe, but his. The obsession had taken root. And Victor Morelli never denied himself what he wanted. The healing process was an ugly business, but for Victor Morelli, it was familiar territory. His body was a roadmap of trauma, stitched together by expensive surgeons and pure, spiteful willpower. But this time, the recovery felt different. It was slower, not because his cells were failing him, but because he willed them to lag. By the 7th day, the fever had broken completely. The fire in his side, where the bullet had grazed his ribs, had dulled to a manageable throb, a reminder of the betrayal rather than an incapacitating injury. He could stand without swaying. He could make a fist with enough force to shatter a windpipe. In the dark hours of the morning, while Alina and her brother slept, Victor moved silently through the small living room, doing push-ups on the worn rug, testing his limits, ensuring the wolf inside him was still sharp. But when the sun rose and Alina emerged from her bedroom, rubbing sleep from her eyes, Victor returned to the couch. He slumped his shoulders. He added a slight tremor to his hand when he reached for his water glass. He deliberately moved with a stiff, pained gait that elicited a look of immediate concern from her. He was lying. He was manipulating her empathy to buy time, and he did not care. The apartment had become a fortress of solitude that he was loath to leave. The chaotic noise of the American city outside, the sirens, the shouting, the grinding gears of garbage trucks, felt miles away. Inside, there was only the smell of vanilla, the hum of the refrigerator, and Alina. He spent the days while she was at work analyzing her life. He wasn't just watching, he was gathering intelligence. He learned that she kept her tips in a glass jar above the fridge, counting them every Friday with a furrowed brow. He learned that she skipped lunch to afford fresh vegetables for Josh's dinner. He learned that she hummed old jazz standards when she thought she was alone, her voice smoky and melancholic. He memorized these details with the same intensity he used to memorize the shipping routes of his contraband or the names of a rival family's lieutenants. To Victor, information was controlled, but with Alina, the control felt slippery. The more he learned, the less he wanted to use it against her, and the more he wanted to simply, I know her, to earn his keep, and to assuage the slight guilt pricking at the back of his mind. Victor began to make himself useful. It started small. Alina came home one Tuesday to find the wobbly leg of the kitchen table stabilized. She frowned, shaking it, testing its firmness. She looked at Victor, who was feigning sleep on the couch, a book resting on his chest. A small smile touched her lips. 2 days later, the cabinet door that always squeaked was silent. Then came the sink. Josh, Alina's teenage brother, had been circling Victor like a wary stray dog. The boy was 17, lanky, and filled with the defensive aggression of a male who feels the need to protect his territory but lacks the strength to do so. He watched Victor with narrowed eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the large, scarred stranger sleeping in their living room. It happened on a Thursday evening. Alina was working a double shift. Josh was in the kitchen, wrestling with the faucet. Water was spraying everywhere, soaking the front of his t-shirt. "Damn it!" Josh shouted, slamming a wrench against the counter. "Stupid piece of junk!" Victor opened one eye. He sat up slowly, wincing for effect, and watched the boy struggle. The pipe under the sink had burst a seal. It was an easy fix if one knew how to apply pressure, but Josh was just stripping the threads. Victor stood up. He walked into the kitchen, his presence sudden and imposing in the small space. Josh jumped back, looking defensive. "I got it," Josh snapped, his voice cracking. "You are stripping the nut," Victor said calmly. His voice was deep, carrying a natural authority that made people stop and listen. "Hand me the wrench. I don't need your help." "The water is ruining the floorboards," Victor pointed out, gesturing to the spreading puddle. "Alina will not be happy." The mention of his sister deflated Josh's bravado. He hesitated, then shoved the wrench at Victor. "Fine. Fix it if you're so smart." Victor ignored the attitude. He knelt, ignoring the sharp pull in his side. With efficient, practiced movements, he realigned the pipe, applied the plumber's tape he had found in the junk drawer earlier that day, and tightened the fitting. The spray stopped instantly. He stood up and wiped his hands on a rag. "Tighten, but do not force," Victor said, handing the wrench back. "Metal has a temper. You must respect it." Josh stared at the dry sink, then up at Victor. "Where did you learn to do that? Were you a plumber or something?" "I learned that if you want something to work, you fix it yourself," Victor replied. "Relying on others is a good way to drown." Josh snorted, but the hostility in his posture evaporated. "Yeah, I guess." He paused, looking at the floor. "Thanks. Don't tell Alina I almost flooded the place?" "It never happened," Victor said. The truce was solidified 2 days later with the landlord, Mr. Henderson was a short, red-faced man who smelled of stale cigars and cheap cologne. He pounded on the door on a Saturday morning, demanding to speak to Alina. Victor was in the shower, a luxury Alina had insisted on, so he missed the initial exchange. When he emerged, Dressed in a clean pair of sweatpants Josh had lent him and a tight undershirt, he found Alina standing in the doorway, looking small. "I told you. Mr. Henderson, I'll have the rest of the rent on Tuesday," Alina was saying, her voice trembling slightly. "I just had to pay for Josh's school fees. Tuesday isn't today. Alina," Henderson barked, stepping into her personal space. "I'm running a business, not a charity. You pay up, or I put your stuff on the curb, and I heard you have some vagrant staying here. That's a lease violation." Alina stepped back, flustered. "He's a guest. He's leaving soon." "He leaves now, or you're evicted," Henderson shouted, raising a finger to point in her face. The air in the hallway changed temperature. Victor stepped out from the hallway shadows. He moved with the silent, fluid grace of a predator emerging from the tall grass. He didn't say a word. He simply walked up behind Alina and placed a hand on the door frame, looming over her. He was 6'3" of solid, scarred muscle. His wet hair was slicked back, revealing the sharp, brutal angles of his face. He looked at Henderson with eyes that were devoid of humanity, eyes that had watched men beg for their lives and felt nothing. Henderson froze. His finger dropped. He looked up at Victor, his face draining of color. "Is there a problem?" Victor asked. His voice was soft, terrifyingly soft. Henderson stammered. Just discussing the rent." "She said Tuesday," Victor stated. "It wasn't a question. Tuesday means Tuesday." He took a half step forward, placing himself partially in front of Alina. "And as for the guest, I am not a vagrant. I am family. Do we have an understanding?" Henderson swallowed hard, nodding rapidly. "Yeah, sure. Tuesday. That's fine." The landlord turned and hurried down the hall, almost tripping over his own feet. Alina let out a long breath she had been holding. She looked up at Victor, her eyes wide. "You didn't have to do that. He can be nasty." "He is a coward," Victor said dismissively. "Bullies are always cowards when they face something bigger than them." Josh, who had been watching from the kitchen, grinned. "Dude, that was awesome. Did you see his face?" Alina looked from her brother to Victor. She should have been angry. She should have told him not to interfere. But instead, she felt a warm flush spread through her chest. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel like she was fighting the world alone. As the days turned into a second week, the dynamic in the apartment shifted. Victor stopped pretending to be an invalid, though he maintained the vague story of being down on his luck. He cleaned. He fixed it. He cooked simple meals with the limited ingredients they had, chopping vegetables with a knife skill that was professional and slightly unsettling. But it was the nights that changed everything. The apartment had no air conditioning, and the humid city heat trapped itself in the brick walls. Victor, claiming the heat bothered his healing wounds, began to sleep shirtless on the couch. Alina tried not to look. She really did, but the apartment was small, and he was impossible to ignore. She would come out for a glass of water and find him lying there, the streetlights from outside casting stripes across his torso. His body was a masterpiece of violence. The scars were thick and white against his tanned skin, weaving a story of survival. But beneath the scars, the muscle was defined and hard. One evening, she caught him doing sit-ups. He paused at the top of the movement, his abdominal muscles rippling, sweat glistening on his collarbone. He looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. Alina froze, her hand gripping her glass. She felt a jolt of desire so sharp it shocked her. It wasn't just gratitude anymore. It was a visceral, magnetic pull toward the danger he represented. "Sorry," she murmured, turning away quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You live here." "Alina," Victor said, his voice rough. "You are never an intrusion." He stood up and walked over to her. He was too close. The heat coming off him was palpable. He took the glass from her hand, his fingers brushing hers, a deliberate, lingering contact that sent sparks racing up her arm. "You look exhausted," he said quietly. "I'm fine. Just a long shift." "You work too hard," Victor said, his gaze dropping to her mouth for a fraction of a second before returning to her eyes. You carry the weight of the world for a boy who is almost a man, and for a landlord who does not deserve your politeness. You are too good for this city. Alina. The compliment was simple, but the way he said it, with such solemn conviction, shattered something inside her. No one ever told her she was good. They only told her she was late, or broke, or responsible. I do what I have to do, she whispered. I know, Victor said. That is what makes you dangerous. A woman who sacrifices everything is a woman who has nothing left to lose. He handed the glass back to her and returned to the couch, leaving her standing in the kitchen. Trembling. The storm hit on a Friday night. It was a violent summer squall that turned the sky a bruised purple and rattled the window panes in their frames. Alina and Victor were alone. Josh was staying overnight at his friend's house to study for finals. The wind howled through the alleyways, sounding like a chorus of ghosts. Then, with a loud crack of thunder, the world went black. The power outage plunged the apartment into total darkness. Alina gasped, freezing in the middle of the living room. Stay where you are, Victor's voice came from the dark, calm and grounding. I have a lighter. A moment later, a spark flared, illuminating Victor's face. He moved to the kitchen drawer where she kept the emergency candles. Soon, 3 small flames were dancing on the coffee table, casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. The atmosphere transformed instantly. The shabby apartment softened. The peeling paint disappeared in the gloom, leaving only the golden circle of light around the couch. Well, Alina said, sitting on the rug near the coffee table. There goes Netflix. Victor sat on the floor opposite her, leaning his back against the couch. The candlelight caught the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his eyes. I prefer this. Silence is rare. Alina found a bottle of cheap red wine she had been saving for a special occasion, or a disaster. She uncorked it and poured them each a glass. They drank in silence for a while, listening to the rain hammer against the glass. The intimacy of the moment was overwhelming. The storm had isolated them from the rest of the world, creating a pocket of time where only the two of them existed. Tell me about him, Victor said suddenly. Alina looked up, startled. Who? The man who made you think you have to apologize for taking up space. Alina gripped her wine glass. She looked into the flame. His name was Mark. We dated for 2 years. He wasn't meaningful. Not really. He just made me feel small. If I laughed too loud, he'd shush me. If I wanted to apply for a better job, he'd tell me I wasn't qualified. He chipped away at me until I wasn't sure there was anything left. She took a large swallow of wine. I guess I'm still trying to find the pieces. Victor watched her, his expression darkening. He was a weak man. Only weak men need to make women feel small to feel big themselves. And what about you, Vic? Alina asked, emboldened by the wine and the darkness. Who hurt you? And don't tell me you fell down some stairs. I see the scars. Victor swirled the wine in his glass. He debated how much to say. The truth would send her running. A lie would build a wall. He chose the middle path. Greedy men, Victor said, his voice low and bitter. I built something, an empire of sorts. I gave people jobs, protection, and order. I trusted men I called brothers, but ambition is a rot. They wanted what I had, but they did not want to bleed for it, so they tried to take it. He looked at her, and for a moment the mask slipped. Alina saw the ancient, weary rage in his eyes. I lost everything in one night. Well, he continued, my home, my name, my life. I woke up in the rain, bleeding, with nothing but the clothes on my back. Alina's heart ached for him. She heard a story of a failed business partner, perhaps a construction contractor or a corporate executive who had been embezzled. She didn't hear the Mafia Don. She just heard about a man who had been betrayed. I'm so sorry, she whispered. She shifted closer to him on the rug, drawn by his pain. Do not be, Victor said. It clarified things. It showed me who was loyal, and it led me here. The thunder rolled again, shaking the floorboards. The lights flickered but didn't return. Alina flinched at the noise, instinctively leaning toward him. Victor didn't move away. He shifted. allowing her to settle against his side. Her head found a resting place on his shoulder. It felt natural. Right. She could smell him. The scent of rain, the soap she bought, and that underlying, masculine musk that was uniquely his. His body was hard as stone, warm and solid. "You make me feel safe," Alina admitted, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I don't know why. You're a stranger. You could be a serial killer for all I know, but I feel safe." Victor turned his head. His face was inches from hers. "I am not safe. Alina, I am the opposite of safe." Alina lifted her head. She looked at him. In the candlelight. His mouth looked soft. The bruise on his cheek had faded to a yellow shadow. The intensity in his eyes was no longer terrifying. It was compelling. She didn't think so. She just acted on the pull that had been tugging at her since the moment she saw him in the rain. She leaned in. Victor went still. He could have stopped her. He could have pulled back. But he was a starving man, and she was the feast. Their lips met. It wasn't a movie kiss. It was hesitant, tasting of cheap wine and trepidation. Alina's lips were soft, trembling slightly. Victor held himself in check, terrified that he would crush her with the sheer force of his want. He kissed her back slowly, with a restraint that cost him every ounce of his willpower. He raised a hand, his rough palm cupping her jaw, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. The touch was electric. Alina gasped into his mouth, her fingers curling into the fabric of his t-shirt. The kiss deepened. For a fleeting second, the world tilted. Alina felt consumed, wrapped in a darkness that promised to protect her from everything. Then, reality crashed back in, the disparity between them. The secrets he was hiding, the suddenness of it all. Alina pulled back, gasping for air. Her eyes were wide, her pupils blown. She scrambled backward on the rug, putting distance between them. I can't," she stammered, her hand flying to her mouth. "This isn't right. You're staying here, and you're recovering, and I don't know what I'm doing." She was flustered, her cheeks burning crimson. Victor didn't reach for her. He stayed exactly where he was, his hand slowly lowering to his knee. He watched her with a calm, predatory stillness. He saw her panic, but he also saw the arousal she couldn't hide. "It is okay, Alina," he said, his voice steady. "You do not need to apologize." "I should go to bed," she said hurriedly, standing up on shaky legs. "I have an early shift. The candles. You can blow them out. Good night, Alina," he said. She fled to her room, closing the door with a click that echoed in the silent apartment. Victor sat in the dark, illuminated only by the dying flames. He touched his lips where hers had been. He could still taste her. She thought it wasn't right. She thought she could run from this. Victor stared at the closed door. The obsession wasn't just a spark anymore. It was an inferno. He would burn down the city to keep her safe, but he would also burn down her resistance. He blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness, and smiled. She was already his. She just didn't know it yet. The apartment had become a maze of invisible walls. Since the night of the storm, since the kiss that had tasted of cheap wine and desperate longing, Alina had constructed a fortress of politeness around herself. She moved through the small rooms with her eyes averting his, her conversation reduced to functional necessities. She spoke of grocery lists, utility bills, and the weather, treating Victor like a roommate she was trying not to offend rather than the man whose mouth had branded hers. Victor noticed it all. He saw the way she hesitated before entering a room he was in, the way her breath hitched if he moved too suddenly, the way she fled to the safety of her bedroom the moment dinner was over. A lesser man would have been insulted. A younger man would have pushed, demanded an explanation, or tried to force a confrontation to break the tension. Victor Morelli did neither. He was a hunter who had learned patience in the hardest of schools. He understood that Alina was not retreating because she felt nothing. She was retreating because she felt too much. She was a creature of order, of safety, and he was the chaos that threatened to upend her carefully curated survival. So, he let her build her walls. He respected the distance she placed between them, moving around her like a silent shadow. But while he gave her space, he did not retreat. He simply changed his strategy. He cleaned the apartment until it sparkled. He cooked dinner so that it was ready the moment she walked through the door. Exhausted from her shift, he engaged Josh in long conversations about cars and history, earning the boy's loyalty and, by extension, making himself indispensable to the household. He was embedding himself in her life, root and stem. He was making sure that when she finally stopped running, she would realize he was already the foundation she was standing on. However, while he played the role of the recovering stray by day, his nights belonged to the ghost of Victor Morelli. He waited until the rhythm of the apartment settled into the heavy silence of deep sleep. At 2 a.m, when Alina's breathing was steady and rhythmic in the next room and Josh was snoring softly, Victor rose. He moved with the silence of a phantom. He dressed in dark clothes, a black hoodie Josh had discarded, pulled low over his face, and his own coat, now cleaned and mended. He checked the knife he had pilfered from the kitchen block. It was a poor substitute for his usual Sig Sauer, but in the hands of a man who knew 19 ways to disable a human body, it was lethal enough. He slipped out the fire escape window, descending the rusted iron stairs into the alleyway. The city at night was a different beast than the city of the day. It was his kingdom, even if he was currently exiled from the throne. Victor kept to the shadows, avoiding the main avenues where cameras and patrols lingered. He moved toward the industrial district, to a dive bar called the Rusty Anchor. It was a place where low-level enforcers and informants gathered to drink away their guilt and trade secrets. He needed to know the landscape. He needed to know who had ordered the hit, who was currently running his operations, and how deep the rot went. He entered through the back, blending into the smoky haze of the room. He didn't approach the bar. He stood in the darkest corner, nursing a glass of whiskey he paid for with cash he had lifted from a pickpocket earlier that evening. He listened. The chatter was illuminating. "Sal is clearing house," a voice grumbled from a nearby booth. "Anyone who was loyal to Morelli is getting cut, or worse. Morelli is dead," another voice replied, sounding nervous. "They found the car burnt out by the docks." "Yeah, but nobody—" "Sal is paranoid. He has guys watching the hospitals, the morgues. He thinks Victor is going to pop out of the ground like a zombie." Victor's grip on his glass tightened. Sal, his childhood friend, his underboss, the man he had trusted to watch his back, was the one holding the knife. The confirmation didn't bring relief. It brought a cold, calculated fury. He gathered intel for 3 nights. He learned that Sal was struggling to hold the territories. The Russians were pushing in from the east. The streets were messy. The order Victor had maintained for a decade was crumbling into anarchy. On the 4th night, his luck ran out. He was leaving a pool hall in Queens, having eavesdropped on a conversation between 2 runners. He had his hood up, his head down, walking with the heavy, limping gait he used as a disguise. A car idled at the traffic light, a black Lincoln town car. Victor sensed eyes on him. It was an instinct, a prickle at the base of his neck that had saved him a dozen times before. He didn't look up. He kept walking, turning into an alleyway. But as he turned, the window of the Lincoln rolled down. A face appeared, a man named Marco, an old soldier who had once driven for Victor. Marco's eyes widened. He stared at the silhouette moving into the darkness. He saw the profile, the specific way the man held his shoulders. "Boss?" Marco whispered to the empty air. The light changed. The car behind honked. The Lincoln accelerated away, but the damage was done. A ghost had been spotted. The whisper would start as a rumor, but by morning, it would be a roar. Victor Morelli was not dead. Victor returned to the apartment at 4 a.m, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He knew the clock was ticking now. His sanctuary was compromised. He needed to move, to strike, to finish this war before it came to Alina's doorstep. But as he climbed back through the window and locked it, the exhaustion hit him. His side ached. The physical toll of the double life was catching up. He stripped off his wet layers, leaving them in a pile by the door to dry. He went to the kitchen sink to wash the grime of the city from his face and hands. He didn't bother with a shirt. The apartment was stiflingly hot, the humidity of the coming summer pressing against the windows. He was standing there, gripping the edge of the sink, water dripping from his face, when the light flicked on. Victor spun around, a knife appearing in his hand from nowhere, a reflex he couldn't control. Alina stood in the doorway of the kitchen. She froze, her eyes wide, fixed on the blade. She was wearing a thin cotton sleep shirt, her hair messy around her face. She looked soft, terrified, and beautiful. Victor lowered the knife instantly, setting it on the counter with a clatter. "I apologize," he said, his voice rough with fatigue. Reflex. Alina didn't move. She didn't look at the knife. She was looking at him. She had seen his chest before, briefly, in the dark or through the gaps of a shirt, but under the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen, there was no hiding. His torso was a tapestry of violence. The fresh, pink scar on his ribs from the assassination attempt was just the newest addition. There were old bullet wounds on his shoulder, a jagged knife slash across his pectoral muscle, and burns on his left side that twisted the skin. Alina took a step forward, then another. She moved like she was in a trance. "Vic," she whispered. She stopped inches from him. The heat radiating off his body was immense. He could smell her sleep-warm scent, vanilla and lavender. She reached out. Her hand trembled slightly, but she didn't pull back. Her fingertips brushed the jagged white line of the oldest scar, the one that ran from his collarbone to his sternum. Victor stopped breathing. His muscles locked tight, every instinct screaming at him to pull away, to hide the ugliness of his reality. But he couldn't move. Her touch was like a brand. "What happened to you?" she asked softly, her eyes lifting to his. There was no judgment in them, only a profound, aching sadness. "Who did this?" Victor looked down at her. He wanted to lie. He wanted to tell her it was a car accident, a construction job gone wrong, anything to keep the illusion of the harmless handyman alive. But looking into her amber eyes, the lie died in his throat. "War," he said simply. "You were a soldier?" "Not for a country," Victor replied, his voice a low rumble. He covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm flat against his beating heart. "Some men lose wars. Alina, they die in the mud. I survived mine." The admission hung in the air. It was a warning. "I am violent. I am a survivor. I am dangerous." Alina didn't pull her hand away. Instead, her gaze dropped to his mouth. The air in the kitchen grew heavy, charged with the static electricity of weeks of unsaid things. "You're hurt," she whispered, her voice catching. "I am healing," he corrected. "You have so much pain written on you. And you," Victor murmured, stepping closer until her thighs bumped against his, "have so much light written on you. It terrifies me." The dam broke. Alina made a small, desperate sound in her throat. She surged up on her toes, her hands flying to his neck, tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. Victor didn't hesitate this time. He caught her, his arm sweeping around her waist, crushing her against him. His mouth crashed down on hers. This was not the hesitant, wine-flavored kiss of the power outage. This was raw. It was the collision of two worlds. He tasted rain and whiskey. She tasted mint and sweetness. He kissed her with a starving man's desperation, devouring her sighs. Alina responded with equal fervor. All the caution she had built up, all the sensible reasons to stay away, incinerated in the heat of his touch. She opened to him, her tongue meeting his, a silent battle for dominance that neither wanted to win. Victor groaned low in his throat. He lifted her effortlessly, spinning her around and pressing her back against the cool metal of the refrigerator. Alina wrapped her legs around his waist, locking her ankles together, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. His hands were everywhere, rough palms sliding up her bare thighs, gripping her hips, mapping the curve of her spine through the thin fabric of her shirt. He worshipped her skin with a reverence that bordered on religion. "Victor," she gasped against his lips, using his full name for the first time. "I am here," he growled, burying his face in the curve of her neck, biting gently at the sensitive spot where her pulse hammered. "I am right here." The sensation of his stubble against her soft skin sent shivers racing down her spine. She arched her back, her hands gripping his broad shoulders, feeling the power coiling beneath his skin. They were on the precipice. The kitchen, the apartment, the secrets, it all faded. There was only the friction of skin, the ragged sound of their breathing, and the overwhelming need to be closer, deeper. Victor's hand moved up her thigh, his thumb brushing the hem of her panties. Alina stiffened. It was a subtle movement, but Victor felt it instantly. He froze. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was harsh, his heart thundering against her chest like a trapped bird. He waited. Alina was trembling. Her eyes were closed, her face flushed, her lips swollen, but her body was tense. She started, her voice shaky. I don't know who you are. The words were a bucket of ice water. Victor slowly lowered her legs until her feet touched the linoleum. He kept his hands on her waist to steady her, but the intimacy had shifted. The spell was broken. You know me, Victor said intensely. You know the man who fixes your sink. You know the man who watches you sleep to make sure you are safe. That is me. But there's more, she whispered, opening her eyes. There's so much more, isn't there? The scars, the way you look at people, the way you handle a knife. Victor stepped back. The loss of contact and physical pain. Yes, there is more. I can't do this if I don't know the truth, Alina said, wrapping her arms around herself as if suddenly cold. I can't give myself to a ghost. Vic! Victor looked at her, his expression tormented. He wanted to tell her. God. He wanted to lay it all at her feet, his empire, his sins, his heart. But telling her now, while Sal was hunting, would only paint a target on her back. Ignorance was her only shield. I cannot tell you yet, he said, his voice hollow, for your own safety. Alina looked at him for a long moment, searching for something in his face. Disappointment flickered in her eyes. Then we shouldn't be doing this, she said quietly. She turned and walked out of the kitchen. Victor stood alone under the buzzing fluorescent light, his body burning, his mind racing. He had tasted heaven, and now he had to send it away to keep it from burning down. The next morning was a masterclass in denial. Alina moved through the apartment with a brisk, blind efficiency. She poured coffee. She made toast. She reminded Josh to take his biology textbook. She did not look at Victor. She did not acknowledge the man sitting at her table, the man whose taste was still lingering on her tongue. She acted as if the night before had been a fever dream. Victor followed her lead. He didn't press. He drank his black coffee and read a discarded newspaper. But his eyes followed her every movement. The tension in the room was thick, a physical weight that pressed down on their chests. It wasn't the awkwardness of before. This was the simmering, volatile pressure of unspoken passion and unresolved conflict. Josh, oblivious as always, ate his cereal and complained about a math test. I'm going to be late, Alina announced, grabbing her purse. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob. She hesitated, half turning as if to say something to Victor. Be safe, Victor said, not looking up from the paper. Alina's jaw tightened. You too. She left. Victor waited until the door clicked shut. Then he moved. He went to the window. Peering through the slats of the blinds, he scanned the street below. It was a typical morning. Pedestrians, delivery trucks, a bus wheezing at the corner, and then he saw it. A black sedan. It was parked 3 blocks down, facing the apartment building. It was indistinguishable from 100 other town cars in the city. But to Victor's trained eye, it stood out. The tint was too dark. The engine was running. It circled the block. Slow, methodical. Victor cursed in Italian. They had found him. The sighting last night had been enough. The net was closing. He began to pack. Not clothes. He had none that mattered. He began to gather weapons, the kitchen knife, a length of pipe he had salvaged. He needed to get Alina and Josh out, but he couldn't cause a panic. He needed a plan. Alina's day at the coffee shop was a blur of steam and caffeine. She was on autopilot, her mind constantly drifting back to the kitchen. The feel of Victor's hands, the hardness of his body, the cryptic things he had said. I survived mine. She was angry at herself for wanting him. She was angry at him for hiding. She was terrified of the feeling that she was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to fall. "Alina, table 4 needs a refill," her manager called out. "On it," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. She grabbed the pot and headed to the table. It was empty, save for a dirty cup and a generous tip. And an envelope. It was a plain manila envelope, thick and heavy. There was no name on it, just a symbol drawn in black marker in the corner, a skull. Alina frowned. She looked around the shop. The customers were the usual mix of students and businessmen. No one looked out of place. She picked up the envelope. A cold dread settled in her stomach, sudden and irrational. She walked back to the break room, her hands trembling. She set the pot down and tore open the flap. Photos spilled out onto the break room table. Alina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. They were photos of her. Alina walking to work. Alina buying groceries. Alina laughs with Josh at the bus stop. And then, photos of the apartment, taken from the street. Zoom lenses peering through her windows. There was a photo of Victor sitting on her couch. There was a photo of Victor and Alina standing in the kitchen, silhouetted by the light, their bodies close. The pictures were grainy, black and white, and terrifying. They were the view of a stalker, the view of a predator. Alina shuffled through them, her heart hammering so hard she thought she might faint. At the bottom of the stack was a single index card. It had no words, just the same skull symbol, drawn in heavy, jagged ink, and a date, today's date. The back door of the coffee shop opened with a slam. Alina jumped, spinning around, expecting a gunman. It was just a delivery driver bringing in milk crates. "Whoa, easy there," the driver laughed. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Alina stared at him, unable to speak. She looked back at the photos scattered on the table. Victor. This was about Victor. The cryptic warnings, the scars, the wars he had survived. He hadn't just run away from a bad business deal. He had brought something dark and deadly into her life. She grabbed the photos, shoving them back into the envelope with shaking fingers. She needed to get home. She needed to get Josh, and she needed to scream at Victor Morelli until he told her exactly what kind of monster she had let into her bed. She ripped off her apron and ran out the door, the envelope clutching to her chest like a shield, unaware that across the street, inside the black sedan, a man was watching her through binoculars, lifting a radio to his lips. "Target is moving," the man said. "She has the package. We are green for tonight." The door to the apartment slammed shut with a force that rattled the framed photos on the wall. Alina stood in the entryway, her chest heaving, the manila envelope clutched in her hand like a weapon. The rain from outside was still dripping from her coat, pooling on the linoleum, but she felt none of the cold. She felt only a white-hot fire of betrayal burning through her veins. Victor was in the living room, wiping down the coffee table. He looked up, his movement pausing mid-swipe. He saw the envelope. He saw the look in her eyes, a devastation so profound it looked like physical pain. He set the rag down slowly. He did not ask what was wrong, he knew. Alina marched forward and threw the envelope at him. It struck his chest, the photos spilling out, scattering across the rug like leaves. Grainy, black and white images of her life, of her sanctuary, stared back at them. "Who are you?" Alina demanded. Her voice was not a scream. It was a low, trembling vibration that filled the room. "And do not lie to me. Vic, do not dare lie to me again." Victor looked down at the photos. He saw the skull symbol. He saw the surveillance angles. Sal had been busy. "I told you," Victor said, his voice calm, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I survived a war." "That is not an answer," Alina shouted, tears finally spilling over. "People are following me. People are taking pictures of my brother. You brought this here. You brought this to my door." "I never intended for you to be involved," Victor said, stepping toward her. "Stop!" she snapped, holding up a hand. "Stay away from me. Just tell me the truth. Are you a criminal?" Victor stopped. He looked at her, his dark eyes guarded. "I was involved with dangerous men, powerful men. I ran an organization that managed things." When I tried to change direction, they turned on me. They want me dead. Alina, that is the truth." It was a partial truth, a sanitized version of a bloody reality. He did not tell her he was the capo di capi. He did not tell her he had ordered hits, sanctioned wars, and ruled the underworld with an iron fist. Alina stared at him, shaking her head. "You used us. You used me as a hideout." "No," Victor said sharply. "I used you as a lifeline. There is a difference." "I don't care," she whispered, the fight draining out of her, replaced by a terrifying clarity. "You put Josh in danger. I can handle myself, but Josh, he's a child. I can't have this. I can't have you here." The words struck Victor harder than the bullet that had grazed his ribs. "Alina," he started, his voice cracking. "Get out," she said, pointing to the door. "Pack your things. Just go, please, before they come back." Victor looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, and he knew he had put it there. He had sworn to protect her, and instead, he had become the source of her fear. "Okay," he said softly. "I will go." The sun set, plunging the city into an uneasy twilight. Victor did not leave immediately. He packed his meager belongings, the few clothes she had bought him, the knife he had sharpened, into a canvas bag. But he stalled. He checked the windows. He checked the locks. He could not leave her unprotected. Not when the wolves were circling. Josh was in his room, headphones on, oblivious to the tension that made the air in the apartment thick and unbreathable. Alina sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands, her face pale. It happened at midnight. There was no knock. There was no warning. The front door splintered inward with a deafening crash as a heavy boot kicked the lock mechanism through the frame. Alina screamed, jumping up from the table. Two men burst into the apartment. They were wearing ski masks and dark tactical gear. They held bats and knives, quiet weapons, meant for a silent job. Victor did not hesitate. He did not freeze. He moved. He had been standing by the hallway, his bag on his shoulder. He dropped the bag, in a blur of motion that the human eye could barely track. He intercepted the first attacker. The man swung a baseball bat aimed at Victor's head. Victor ducked, the bat whistling harmlessly through the air where his skull had been a microsecond before. Victor stepped into the guard, driving his elbow into the man's throat with a sickening crunch of cartilage. The man dropped the bat, clutching his neck, gagging. The second man lunged for Alina. "No!" Victor roared. He grabbed the falling bat from the floor and threw it. It struck the second attacker square in the back of the knees. The man buckled. Falling forward, Victor was on him instantly. He wasn't the gentle handyman who fixed sinks. He was a demon. He grabbed the man by the hair and slammed his face into the linoleum floor. Once, twice, 3 times. Blood sprayed across the pristine white cabinets. The first man, gasping for air, tried to pull a knife from his belt. Victor turned, his face a mask of cold, calculated violence. He kicked the man in the chest, sending him flying backward into the bookshelf. The wood splintered, books raining down. Victor followed him, pinning him against the wall with a forearm to the throat. "Who sent you?" Victor snarled, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. The man couldn't speak. His face was purple. Josh stood in the doorway of his bedroom, paralyzed, his eyes wide as saucers. Alina was pressed against the kitchen counter, her hands over her mouth, trembling violently. She was watching a slaughter. She was watching the man she had nursed back to health dismantle 2 armed assailants with the efficiency of a machine. Victor realized they were watching. He realized what he looked like. He knocked the man unconscious with a precise blow to the temple and let him slide to the floor. Silence fell over the apartment. The only sound was the harsh, ragged breathing of the 3 of them and the groan of the unconscious man on the floor. Victor turned to face them. His knuckles were split and bleeding. There was a splatter of blood on his cheek. His chest was heaving, his eyes wild and dilated. Alina stared at him. She looked at the blood on the floor. She looked at the violence inherent in his stance. "Victor," she breathed, the name of a ghost on her lips. Victor took a step toward her, then stopped when she flinched. The rejection cut him deep, but he understood it. He looked from her to Josh, then back to her. "You wanted me to leave." Victor said, his voice rough, vibrating with adrenaline. "If I had left 5 minutes ago, you would be dead. Do you understand?" He pointed a shaking finger at the unconscious men. "They did not come to talk. They came to scrub the site." Alina began to cry. It was a broken, hysterical sound. The reality of how close she had come to losing everything crashed down on her. Victor closed the distance. He didn't care if she was afraid. He needed to anchor her. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip firm but desperate. "Look at me," he commanded. "Alina, look at me." She raised her tear-filled eyes to his. "You are not safe without me," he said with intense conviction. "Not anymore. I brought this storm, yes, but I am the only shelter you have." Alina looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the blood. Yes, but she also saw the terror in his own eyes. He wasn't afraid of the men on the floor. He was afraid for her. She crumbled. "Oh, God," she sobbed, collapsing forward. Victor caught her. He wrapped his arms around her, burying his face in her hair. He held her as she shook, absorbing her fear into his own body. He looked over her shoulder at Josh. "Go to your room, Josh," Victor said, his voice softening. "Lock the door. Put your headphones on. I will handle the trash." Josh nodded mutely, too stunned to argue, and retreated. That night, no police were called. Victor made a phone call to a number he had memorized years ago, a cleaner who owed him a life debt. The bodies were removed before the neighbors finished wondering about the noise. The door was propped shut with a chair. Alina could not stop shaking. She refused to go to her bedroom. She refused to be alone. They sat on the couch, the same couch where he had slept for weeks. Victor sat with his back to the armrest, and Alina curled into him, wrapping her arms around his waist, burying her face in the scent of him. Blood, sweat, and safety. "I'm sorry," he whispered into the darkness, stroking her hair. "I'm so sorry." "Just hold me," she replied, her voice muffled against his shirt. They fell asleep like that, tangled together in the aftermath of violence. Two survivors clinging to the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. Morning brought a harsh, unforgiving light that illuminated the bloodstains on the kitchen grout. Alina woke first. She was stiff, her neck aching from the angle of the couch. She lifted her head and found herself staring at Victor's sleeping face, in repose. The violence was gone. He looked younger, burdened but peaceful. Then she remembered. The men, the fight, the blood. Victor woke the moment her breathing changed. His eyes snapped open, instantly alert. He saw her watching him. He sat up, groaning slightly as his old wounds protested the night's activity. He looked at the kitchen, then at her. "We need to talk," he said. "The real talk." Alina nodded. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping the blanket around herself. "Tell me everything." Victor took a breath. He looked at his hands. "My name is Victor Morelli." Alina froze. The name meant nothing to her, but the weight with which he said it implied it should. Was the head of the Morelli crime family," he continued, forcing himself to hold her gaze. "I controlled the shipping yards, the unions, and the gambling from here to Jersey. I was a king in a world of rats." Alina's mouth opened slightly. "Mafia? Yes. So, everything was a lie," she whispered. "The homeless man, the helplessness. The injury was real," Victor said earnestly. "The betrayal was real. Sal, my second in command, tried to kill me. I crawled to your doorstep because I had nowhere else to go. But I stayed because of you." "Don't say that," she said, her voice shaking. "Don't put that on me. You stayed because you were hiding." "I stayed because you made me feel human," Victor burst out, the confession tearing from his throat. He stood up and paced the small room. "For 20 years, I have been a weapon. I have been a boss. I have been a target. I forgot what it was to just exist, to fix a sink, to eat toast, to watch a woman laugh at a television show." He turned to her, his expression raw. "You gave me a life, Alina, a simple, small, beautiful life, and I was selfish enough to want to keep it, even when I knew it was dangerous." Alina stood up, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "You lied to me every single day. You slept in my home, you ate my food, and you looked me in the eye and lied. Do you know how that feels? I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself, she shouted. And now look, my home is a crime scene. My brother is traumatized. And I am in love with a man who doesn't exist. The words hung in the air. I am in love. Alina clamped her hand over her mouth, her eyes widening in horror. She hadn't meant to say it. It had slipped out on a wave of anger. Victor went still. The anger drained from his face, replaced by a look of intense, burning hunger. Say that again, he whispered. No, she said, backing away. No, I'll take it back. You cannot take it back, Victor said. He crossed the room in 2 long strides. He didn't grab her. He stopped inches from her, his body radiating heat. You love me. I hate you, she cried, but her hands were already reaching for him, clutching the front of his shirt. I hate that you lied. I hate that you're one of them. I am not one of them, Victor growled. I am yours. There is a difference. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. I wasn't hesitant. It was a collision of fear and relief and furious passion. Alina made a sound that was half sob, half moan, and opened her mouth to him. They stumbled backward. Victor's hands were in her hair, on her waist, pulling her flush against him. He needed to feel her alive against him. He needed to erase the memory of the violence with the reality of her skin. Victor? She gasped, breaking the kiss to breathe. We can't. Josh is at school, Victor murmured against her throat. He left an hour ago. I heard him go. Alina didn't argue. She didn't want to argue. The adrenaline from the night before had twisted into something else, a primal need to affirm life in the face of death. They moved to the bedroom. Her bedroom, a space he had never entered. It was small, smelling of lavender and sunlight. He lowered her onto the bed. He looked down at her, his dark eyes sweeping over her form with a possessive intensity that made her shiver. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough. If we do this, there is no going back. You crossed the line with me. I crossed the line the night I opened the door, Alina whispered. She reached up and pulled him down. The act was frantic at first, a desperate tangling of limbs and shedding of clothes, but as skin met skin, the tempo slowed. It became heavy, emotional. Alina ran her hands over his chest. She traced the scar on his ribs, the old bullet wound on his shoulder. She kissed the jagged line of the knife wound he had arrived with. She was mapping his pain, accepting it, claiming it. Victor worshipped her. He touched her as if she were made of glass, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. He kissed every inch of her, murmuring praises in Italian that she didn't understand but felt in her bones. When they finally joined, it was a revelation. It was an anchor. Alina gasped, arching into him, tears slipping from the corners of her eyes. It wasn't just physical. It was the breaking of the final dam. You're mine now, Victor whispered against her ear, his voice a ragged vow. You are mine, Alina. No one touches you. No one hurts you. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him deeper. I don't know if I can do this, she sobbed softly. I don't know if I can live in your world. Victor, it's too dark. Victor paused. He propped himself up on his elbows, framing her face with his hands. He looked into her eyes with a terrifying resolve. Then I'll burn that world down, he said. And she believed him. They lay in the tangled sheets for a long time afterward. The sun moved across the floorboards. The city outside rumbled on, indifferent to the shift in the universe that had occurred in the small apartment. Alina rested her head on Victor's chest, listening to the steady thrum of his heart. She traced meaningless patterns on his skin with her fingertips. What happens now? She asked quietly. Victor tightened his arm around her. The softness of the morning was over. The wolf was back, calculating, planning. Sal knows I am alive, Victor said, his voice hard. The men last night, they were scouts. The next wave will be an army. I cannot hide anymore. So we run? Alina asked. No, Victor said. If we run, they chase. We will look over our shoulders for the rest of our lives. I will not let you live like that. He sat up, the muscles in his back shifting. I have to end it. I have to cut the head off the snake. Alina sat up too, pulling the sheet around her. Fear pricked at her heart again. But it was different now. It wasn't fear of him. It was fear for him. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to finish the war," Victor said. He looked at her, and a sad smile touched his lips. "But first, I need to make sure you and Josh are safe. I have a safe house, a place no one knows about. I need to take you there. And you? I have to go back into the fire," he said. Alina grabbed his hand. "You promise you'll come back?" "You promise me, Victor." He kissed her knuckles, one by one. "I survived death once to find you. Alina, I will not let death take me before I have had a lifetime with you. I promise." It was a promise he intended to keep, even if he had to kill every man in the city to do it. The morning light that filtered into the safe house, a nondescript high-security apartment in a quiet suburb, was gray and unforgiving. Alina reached out across the mattress, her hand seeking the warmth of solid muscle and scarred skin. She found only cold sheets. She sat up, her heart giving a frantic, hollow thump against her ribs. The room was silent. Josh was still asleep in the second bedroom, his soft snoring the only sound in the stillness. On the pillow next to her lay a single sheet of hotel stationery. Alina picked it up, her fingers trembling. The handwriting was sharp, angular, and rushed. "I'll fix this. Wait for me." There was no signature. There didn't need to be. It was so quintessentially Victor, commanding, protective, and infuriatingly vague. He had gone back into the fire, just as he had promised he would, leaving her safe behind walls of brick and anonymity. Alina crumpled the note in her fist, a mixture of fear and anger rising in her throat. He had left her. Again. After everything they had shared the night before, the raw confessions, the desperate intimacy, he had slipped away like a thief in the night to wage a war he might not survive. She spent the morning pacing the small living room, checking the news on her phone every 5 minutes. Josh woke up, sensing the tension immediately. But for once, he didn't ask questions. He just ate his cereal and watched the door, holding a baseball bat across his lap as if he were the new guard dog. By noon, the confinement was suffocating. Alina needed air. She needed to feel like she wasn't a prisoner in her own life. Against Victor's strict instructions to stay inside, she walked out onto the small balcony. It was on the 4th floor, overlooking a quiet street lined with oak trees. It felt safe enough. She was wrong. 5 minutes later, a buzz came from the intercom system by the door. Alina froze. No one knew they were here. Victor had been meticulous. She approached the monitor cautiously. The grainy black and white camera revealed a woman standing at the main entrance. She was stunning, dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a coat that cost more than Alina made in a year. She wasn't police. She wasn't a hitman. She held up a piece of paper to the camera. On it, written in thick marker, was, "I know who he is. Let me in." Alina buzzed her in. It was a reckless decision born of desperation for answers that Victor refused to give. When the woman arrived at the door, she didn't look like a threat. She looked like ice. Her eyes were cold, assessing Alina with a mixture of pity and disdain. "You must be the barista," the woman said, her voice smooth and cultured. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her heels clicking on the hardwood. "I expected more." "Who are you?" Alina asked, standing her ground, though she felt woefully underdressed in her jeans and oversized sweater. "I am Sophia," the woman said, removing her leather gloves finger by finger. "Victor's fiancé, or rather, I was, before he decided to play dead and live in squalor." Alina felt the blood drain from her face. "Fiancé? He never mentioned a fiancé." Sophia laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "Of course he didn't. Victor doesn't talk about things he considers settled business. Our families arranged the union years ago. It was a merger of empires. He was supposed to marry me to secure the southern territories." She walked closer to Alina, invading her personal space. She smelled of expensive perfume and malice. "I'm here to warn you, little girl," Sophia said softly. "You think he loves you. You think because he slept in your bed and fixed your sink that he is a reformed man." "He cares about me," Alina said, though her voice wavered. "Victor Morelli is not capable of love," Sophia stated, her eyes boring into Alina's. "He is a creature of possession. He does not want a partner, he wants a pet. He wants something soft to keep in a cage while he tears the world apart. That is what you are to him. A distraction, an obsession. You're lying, Alina whispered. Am I? Sophia raised an eyebrow. Ask yourself, did he ever give you a choice? Or did he just slowly take over your life until you had no one left but him? That isn't romance. Alina, that is a siege. Sophia turned and walked to the door. He will burn the world down. Yes, but eventually, the fire consumes everything, even the things he claims to protect. Get out while you can. The door clicked shut. Alina stood alone in the hallway, her knees shaking. The words sank deep, hooking into the insecurities she had tried to ignore. Just obsession. Was that all it was? Was she just a prize he had won because he was the only one playing the game? Across the city, Victor Morelli stepped out of a taxi in the industrial district. He was no longer wearing the flannel and denim of the homeless handyman. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that had been tailored to conceal the Kevlar vest strapped to his chest. His hair was slicked back. His eyes were dead. He was the capo again. He walked toward the back entrance of an Italian restaurant that had been a neutral ground for the families for 30 years. Today, it was the site of a meeting called by Sal. They were dividing Victor's territory, picking over the bones of his empire like vultures. Victor checked the device in his pocket, a high-fidelity listening bug. He didn't just need to kill them. He needed to bury them. He needed the federal government to do the cleanup so that no one would come looking for retribution later. He bypassed the guards at the back door with a swiftness that was almost supernatural. 2 quick strikes to the throat, and the men were unconscious before they hit the pavement. Victor dragged them behind a dumpster and moved inside. He slipped into the ventilation room, finding the grate that looked down into the private dining area. Sal sat at the head of the table. He looked tired, nervous. Across from him sat the Russo brothers, the rivals who had helped orchestrate the hit on Victor. "We need to move the product faster," one of the Russos was saying. "With Morelli gone, the ports are open, but the feds are sniffing around. Victor kept the feds away because he had rules," Sal snapped, pouring himself a drink. "We broke the rules when we took him out." "It had to be done," the other Russo said. He was going soft, talking about legitimizing. "We couldn't let him turn the business into a charity. So I put a bullet in my best friend," Sal muttered, downing the whiskey. "And for what? So you 2 greedy pigs could eat?" "You pulled the trigger, Sal," Russo laughed. "Don't get sentimental now. We run the city. Victor is fish food." Victor, watching from the shadows above, pressed the stop button on the recorder. Confession. He pulled out his burner phone. He attached the audio file and sent it to a number he had memorized, an FBI agent who had been trying to nail the Russos for a decade, but lacked the inside evidence. Subject: The Russo-Morelli Conspiracy. Full confession attached. Location: Gino's restaurant. Come and get them. He hit send. The legal trap was sprung. Now for the physical one. Victor dropped from the vent, landing on the serving table in the corner of the room with a heavy thud, sending silverware clattering. The 3 men at the table jumped up, chairs scraping against the floor. Sal dropped his glass. It shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Victor stood up, straightening his tie. He looked at them with a terrifying calmness. "Hello, boys," he said. "I heard you were dividing my kingdom." "Victor," Sal whispered, his face turning the color of ash. "You're dead." "I'm very hard to kill," Victor replied. He drew 2 pistols from his jacket, not the clumsy street weapons he had used before, but his own custom Berettas he had retrieved from his cache. "Kill him!" Russo screamed, reaching for his own weapon. The room erupted. Victor dove behind the heavy oak bar as bullets shredded the wood where he had been standing. He wasn't fighting for territory anymore. He wasn't fighting for pride. He was fighting for the woman waiting in the safe house. He was fighting for the right to go back to her and be the man she thought he was. He popped up, firing 2 controlled shots. One of the Russo brothers fell, a red blossom appearing on his chest. "You traitor!" the surviving Russo roared, flipping the heavy table for cover. Sal was frozen, staring at Victor. "I had to. Vic, they made me." "You chose." Victor called out over the gunfire. "We always have a choice. Sal!" The gunfight was brutal and short. It was a close-quarters nightmare of ricocheting bullets and splintering wood. Victor moved with lethal efficiency, flanking the surviving Russo brother and ending him with a precise shot. But as he turned to face Sal, a hidden door in the kitchen burst open. 2 more enforcers, men Victor didn't recognize, rushed in with shotguns. Victor took them down, but not before the thunderous roar of a 12-gauge tore through the air. Victor felt a sledgehammer impact to his left shoulder, spinning him around, then a second impact to his thigh. He hit the ground hard, his vision swimming. Sal stood over him, hand shaking, holding a small pistol. "I'm sorry, Vic, I really am." Victor looked up at his old friend. He saw the sirens flashing blue and red against the windows outside. The FBI had arrived. The trap had worked perfectly, except for the blood pouring out of him. "Don't be sorry," Victor wheezed, raising his right hand. "Be faster." He didn't shoot. He didn't have to. The front doors burst open. "FBI! Drop the weapon!" Sal turned, startled. Victor slumped back against the ruined bar. The world was going gray at the edges. The sounds of the agents shouting, the cuffs clicking, Sal screaming, it all faded into a dull roar. He closed his eyes. He thought of the note. "Wait for me." He hoped she was still waiting. The news report broke at 3 p.m. Alina was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Sophia's poison still circulating in her veins. Josh had the TV on low volume. "Breaking news," the anchor announced, her face grave. "A massive shootout has occurred at a restaurant in the industrial district. Sources say it involves high-ranking members of the Morelli crime family. Federal agents have arrested several individuals, but reports confirm multiple fatalities." Alina's head snapped up. "The bodies of 2 unidentified men have been removed," the reporter continued, "and 1 man, believed to be the instigator of the conflict, has been rushed to St. Jude's Hospital in critical condition." The screen flashed to a shaky cell phone video taken by a bystander. It showed paramedics wheeling a gurney toward an ambulance. The figure on it was motionless, covered in blood, but one hand hung off the side. Alina saw the ring, a simple silver band on the pinky finger. It was the only piece of jewelry Victor wore. "Victor!" she screamed. She didn't think so. She didn't consider Sophia's warning. She didn't consider the danger. She grabbed her keys. "Josh, stay here," she yelled, already running for the door. "Alina, wait!" Josh shouted. But she was gone. The drive to the hospital was a blur of running red lights and terrifying prayers. "Don't die, you promised. You promised you'd fix it." When she arrived at St. Jude's, the emergency wing was swarming with police. It was chaos. Alina pushed through the crowd, her eyes wild. "I need to see him," she demanded at the nurse's station. "Victor Morelli. Where is he?" The nurse looked up, startled by the woman's intensity. "Ma'am, that area is restricted. He's in police custody and surgery." "I don't care." Alina slammed her hand on the desk. He's my fiancé." The lie tasted like ash, but it was the only key she had. "Please, is he alive?" The nurse softened slightly. "He's in surgery. Gunshot wounds to the shoulder and leg. Massive blood loss. It doesn't look good." Alina collapsed onto a plastic chair in the waiting room. She sat there for 6 hours. She watched the police officers guarding the hallway. She watched the doctors rushing in and out. She thought about what Sophia had said. He wants a pet, an obsession. She thought about the way Victor had looked at her when he fixed her sink, the way he had held her during the storm, the way he had shielded her body with his own when the men broke in. That wasn't possession, that was a sacrifice. Sophia was wrong. Sophia knew the monster, but she didn't know the man. Alina knew the man. Finally, a doctor emerged. He looked exhausted. He spoke to the police officers, who nodded and stepped aside. Then he looked at Alina. "Are you the family?" he asked. "Yes," Alina said, standing up on numb legs. "He's out of surgery. He's stable, but barely. You can see him for 5 minutes. The officers will be right outside." Alina walked into the ICU room. It was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor. Victor lay in the bed, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. He was pale, his skin almost translucent against the white sheets, tubes and wires snaked from his body. His chest was heavily bandaged. Alina walked to the bedside. Her anger, her doubt, her fear, it all evaporated. All that was left was a fierce, protective love that took her breath away. She reached out and took his hand. It was cold and calloused. "You idiot," she whispered, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "You absolute idiot." She pulled a chair close and sat down, refusing to let go of his hand. She reached up with her other hand and gently stroked his forehead, brushing back a lock of dark hair. "You don't get to leave me now," she said fiercely. "You don't get to storm into my life, make me love you, and then die on me. That is not part of the deal. Victor," she leaned in close to his ear, "Sophia came to see me. She told me you were just obsessed. She told me I was just a pet." She kissed his temple. "Prove her wrong. Wake up and prove her wrong." She sat there for an hour, ignoring the nurses who told her time was up, the police officers, sensing the gravity of the situation. Let her stay. It was the squeeze that alerted her, a faint pressure on her fingers. Alina gasped, looking at his face. "Victor?" His eyelids fluttered. They were heavy, fighting the weight of the anesthesia and the trauma. Slowly, agonizingly, they opened. His eyes were unfocused at first, glassy and dark. Then they found her. He blinked. He tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. He swallowed and tried again. "Alina!" he rasped. It was barely a sound, just a shape of air. "I'm here," she sobbed, gripping his hand with both of hers. "I'm right here. You're alive." Victor looked at her. He saw the tears. He saw the exhaustion. But mostly, he saw the fierce determination in her amber eyes. He saw the woman who had dragged a stranger out of the rain. A faint, weak smile touched the corner of his mouth. He squeezed her hand again, a little stronger this time. "Still obsessed," he muttered. Alina laughed, a wet, broken sound of pure relief. She pressed her forehead against his hand. "Good," she whispered, "because I'm not going anywhere." The monitor beeped a steady, reassuring rhythm. Outside, the police were waiting to question him. The news vans were circling. The world was still dangerous and the future was uncertain, but in that sterile white room, Victor Morelli held onto Alina's hand like it was the only anchor in the universe. And for the first time in his life, the war was over. The recovery was not a sprint. It was a slow, agonizing marathon. For the second time in 2 months, Alina found herself nursing Victor Morelli back to life, but the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. The first time, he had been a stranger, a mystery wrapped in a woolen coat and silence. Now, he was a known entity. Every scar she cleaned, every bandage she changed. She knew the story behind it. She knew the violence he was capable of, and she knew the tenderness that lived beneath it. Victor was a difficult patient. He hated weakness. He hated the tubes, the monitors, and the way his left leg refused to bear weight without trembling. He growled at the nurses and glared at the doctors. But when Alina walked into the room, the storm in his eyes always settled into a quiet, dark calm. She brought him coffee from the cafeteria, which he drank despite complaining it tasted like boiled dirt. She read to him while he slept. She learned the landscape of his body not with the hesitation of a savior, but with the familiarity of a partner. But the outside world was not as quiet as the hospital room. 2 weeks after the shootout, while Victor was undergoing physical therapy, a man in a gray suit cornered Alina in the waiting room. He flashed a badge. "Special Agent Miller." "Miss Rossi," he said, his voice carrying the weary cadence of a bureaucrat. "We need to talk." He led her to a small, sterile conference room. He laid a file on the table. It was thick. "Victor Morelli is going to prison," Miller stated flatly. "Or he would be, if half the evidence didn't mysteriously vanish into the ether of classified federal intelligence thanks to that recording he sent us. He bought his freedom with the heads of the Russo crime family." Alina crossed her arms. "Then why are you talking to me?" "Because a man like that doesn't retire," Miller said, leaning forward. "He resets, he rebuilds, and you are the weak link in his armor. You and your brother," He pushed a paper across the table. Testify that he coerced you. Testify that he was running operations from your apartment. Give us anything to pin a RICO charge on him that sticks past the plea deal. We will put you and Josh in witness protection. New names, new lives, somewhere he can never find you. Alina looked at the paper. It was an offer of safety. It was logical. It was sensible. She looked up at Miller. You think he's a monster? I know he is, Miller replied. I've seen the crime scene photos. You saw the photos, Alina said, her voice steady. But you didn't see him stand between my little brother and a baseball bat. You didn't see him fix my sink because he didn't want me to worry about water damage. You didn't see him bleed out on a restaurant floor to stop a war. She stood up, pushing the paper back. Victor Morelli may have been a monster to the world, Agent Miller, but he burned that world down to keep me safe. I don't need your protection. I have his... She walked out. When she returned to the room, Victor was sitting up, looking out the window at the city skyline. He looked tired. The gray at his temples seemed more pronounced. The Fed, Victor said without turning around. He offered you a way out. He did, Alina admitted, closing the door. You should take it. Alina stopped. Excuse me? Victor turned his head. His eyes were tortured. I am poison, Alina. I told you this. I drag darkness with me wherever I go. Look at us. You are arguing with federal agents. Your brother is living in a safe house. I am half a cripple in a hospital bed. This is not the life you deserve. He took a breath, his voice cracking. If you leave now, if you take the deal, I will not look for you. I will let you go. I will give you that mercy. It was the most selfless thing he had ever said. It was also the most foolish. Alina walked to the bed. She didn't shout. She didn't cry. She simply grabbed the lapels of his hospital gown and pulled him forward. She kissed him. It was a fierce, claiming kiss. It tasted of defiance. She kissed him until she felt the resistance drain out of him, until his hand came up to cup the back of her neck, holding her there like she was oxygen. She pulled back, her forehead resting against his. Don't you dare, she whispered furiously. Don't you dare try to be noble now. You made me fall in love with you. Victor, you made me need you. You don't get to disappear again to save my soul. My soul is yours. Deal with it. Victor stared at her. A shudder went through him. He closed his eyes, letting out a long, ragged exhale. Okay. A month later, the discharge papers were signed. The transition was chaotic. Josh was the wild card. Alina worried how her teenage brother would handle the reality of living with a retired mafia don. They were packing the last of the boxes in the safe house. Victor was moving slowly, favoring his left leg, wrapping dishes in newspaper. Josh was helping him. So, Josh said, taping up a box, are we really moving to the middle of nowhere? It is not the middle of nowhere, Victor corrected. It is the coast. It is quiet. No sirens. And no pizza delivery at 3 a.m, Josh lamented. He looked at Victor. You know, my friends think you're like a supervillain. Victor paused. And what do you think? Josh looked at the man who had saved his life. He looked at the cane leaning against the wall. I think you're weird, Josh said bluntly. You stare at people too hard. You sharpen knives when you're bored. And you're way too old for my sister. Alina, listening from the kitchen, stifled a laugh. But, Josh continued, shrugging, you didn't run. When those guys broke in, you stayed, you fought. He picked up the box. You're weird, but you're loyal. I can live with loyalty. Victor looked at the boy. A rare, genuine smile touched his lips. Thank you, Josh. Just don't expect me to call you Godfather or anything, Josh muttered, walking out. I would prefer Victor, he called after him. The house was a sprawling, weathered structure of gray stone and cedar, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It was isolated, surrounded by pines and the roar of the surf. It was a fortress, but it was also a home. Victor had bought it under a new identity, Thomas Black, to the few neighbors in the nearest town. He was a retired investor recovering from a car accident. To Alina, he was just hers. Life settled into a new rhythm. The frantic energy of the city was replaced by the slow, steady beat of the tides. Victor spent his mornings doing physical therapy on the deck, rebuilding the muscle he had lost. Alina found a job at a local bakery, not because she needed the money, Victor's hidden accounts were substantial, but because she loved the work. Josh started at the local high school, complaining about the lack of skyscrapers but secretly loving the ocean. The obsession that Sophia had warned her about was still there, but it had transmuted. Victor was still watchful. He still tracked her movements, ensuring she got home safely. If she was 5 minutes late, he was waiting on the porch, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. It was attentive. He anticipated her needs before she spoke to them. He learned to listen to her silence. 6 months after they moved in, winter arrived. The ocean turned a steel gray, and the wind howled around the eaves of the house. One evening, the power went out, a reminder of that night in her apartment so long ago. Victor lit a fire in the massive stone hearth. The living room was bathed in the warm, flickering glow of the logs. The wind battered the windows, but inside, it was safe. Alina sat on the rug, drinking red wine. Victor sat in the armchair, watching her. "Come here," he said softly. Alina stood and walked to him. He took her hand and pulled her down so she was kneeling between his legs. He brushed a stray hair from her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I have been thinking," he began, his voice deep and resonant in the quiet room. "That's dangerous," she teased gently. "I have no ring," Victor said, ignoring her jest. "I left the family jewels in a vault in New York. I left the money, the influence, the titles. I walked away from the empire." He took her left hand, his thumb rubbing over her ring finger. "I am not a king anymore, Alina. I am just a man with a bad leg and a history written in blood. I have nothing to offer you but these hands." He held them up, large, scarred, capable of terrible violence and incredible gentleness, and this heart, which beats only because you commanded it to. He leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made the world stop. "Will you keep me?" he asked, broken parts and all. Alina felt the tears prick her eyes. It wasn't a flowery speech, it was a surrender. "You aren't broken, Victor," she whispered. "You're just textured." She kissed his palms. "Yes, I will keep you. I will keep you forever." Victor let out a breath. Pulling her up into his lap, he kissed her, and the firelight seemed to dance across their skin. "Marry me," he murmured against her lips. "Here, now. In this room. No priests, no audience, just us." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes." He carried her to the rug in front of the fire. The lovemaking that followed was slow, deliberate, and overwhelmingly emotional. There was no rush, no desperation of imminent danger. There was only the luxury of time. Victor undressed her with reverence. He treated her body like a holy site, his hands worshipping every curve, every hollow. He kissed the pulse at her throat, the soft skin of her stomach, the inside of her wrists. "You are mine," he whispered, the old possessiveness flaring up but softened by love. "You are the only thing that is real." "I'm yours," Alina replied, arching into his touch, her hands tangling in his hair. "I'm yours." When he entered her, it was a homecoming. They moved together in the firelight, a rhythm as old as the ocean outside. Alina looked up at him, seeing the raw emotion on his face, the vulnerability he showed only to her. She ran her fingers over the scar on his chest, the one he had gotten saving her. It was a map of their journey. They whispered promises into the dark, words that didn't need to be shouted to be true. Always. Forever. Just us. When they finally lay still, wrapped in a tangle of limbs and blankets, watching the embers fade, Alina knew that the war was truly over. Epilogue. Spring came to the coast in a riot of wildflowers and salt spray. Alina sat on the stone bench in the garden Victor had built for her. It was filled with hardy, resilient plants that could survive the salt air, roses, lavender, sea thrift. Down on the beach below, she could see two figures, Josh was throwing a stick for a stray dog they had adopted, and Victor was walking beside him. Victor's limp was barely noticeable now. He walked with his head up, looking at the horizon, not looking for threats, but simply watching the waves. Alina smiled, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself against the breeze. She thought back to that rainy night in the city. The bruised, broken man slumped against the brick wall. The decision to stop, the decision to open the door. I let a stranger in, she thought. I let a ghost sleep on my couch. She watched Victor stop and point something out to Josh, a ship on the horizon. Maybe. He placed a hand on Josh's shoulder, a gesture of paternal guidance. I found the man who would burn the world just to see me smile. As if sensing her thoughts, Victor turned. He looked up at the cliff. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze. He didn't wave. He just watched her. Sophia had called it obsession, and maybe, in the beginning, it was the desperate fixation of a drowning man clinging to a raft. But as Victor began to walk up the path toward her, his eyes never leaving her face, Alina knew the truth. Obsession takes. Love gives, and Victor had given her everything. He reached the top of the path and stopped before her. He reached out, brushing a strand of wind-blown hair from her cheek, his touch as gentle as a breeze. "You are smiling," he said quietly. "I am," Alina replied. "I was just thinking how lucky I am." Victor shook his head slowly. "No, I am the lucky one, the homeless man who found a queen." He leaned down and kissed her, and the sound of the ocean faded away, leaving only the beat of two hearts that had survived the fire to find peace. Fade out. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey of Alina and Victor as much as I enjoyed writing it. It's been a roller coaster of emotions, danger, and romance. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment down below telling me where in the world you are listening from. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this series, please make sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss an episode. There are many more passionate, thrilling tales waiting to be told. Share your thoughts in the comments in English. What was your favorite part? Did you like the ending? I can't wait to read what you think. Until next time.